We heard you bought a penthouse, so we will move in and make peace. That single sentence cost my son his inheritance, though he does not know it yet. For 30 years, I was just an ATM to him, but the moment I spent $2.5 million on myself, suddenly, family mattered again. I looked at the city lights from my balcony and realized that some wars are fought with silence, and others are won with a signature. My name is Vivian Clark. At 57 years old, I have mastered the art of being invisible. In a city like Seattle, where human worth is often calculated in stock options and horsepower, a widow in a beige cardigan is little more than background noise. That was how I survived the last 20 years. I was the woman who brought coupon clippings to the grocery store, the one who drove a Honda Civic until the odometer rolled over 300,000 miles. I was the reliable, boring mother who kept her head down and her mouth shut. My son, David, often told me, "Mom, you really need to upgrade your life. It's embarrassing." He said this while wearing a watch that cost more than my car, a watch I knew he put on a credit card. He did not know about the accounts. He did not know that while he was chasing status, I was compounding interest. My husband, rest his soul, left me with a mess of debts and a broken heart, but he also left me a terrifying fear of poverty. So I worked. I worked 60 hours a week in compliance audit, finding the pennies that corporations tried to hide. I lived on 40% of my income and saved the rest. I denied myself vacations, new clothes, and expensive dinners so that David could have a tuition-free degree and a down payment on his first house. But last month, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way David rolled his eyes when I asked him to help me fix a leaky faucet. Maybe it was the realization that I have more years behind me than ahead. I did something reckless. I did something entirely out of character. I bought the penthouse at the Spire. The transaction took 3 days. The price was $2,800,000. I paid in full, no mortgage, no bank approval needed. When I handed the cashier's check to the closing agent, she looked at my scuffed handbag and then back at the check with wide eyes. "Mrs. Clark," she stammered, adjusting her glasses. "This is substantial." "Is the ink dry?" I asked. "Yes." "But..." "Then give me the keys. Now." I stand in a living room that is larger than the entire house I raised my son in. The floors are imported Italian marble, cold and smooth under my bare feet. The windows are 20 feet high, framing the skyline like a living painting. It is quiet here. The air conditioning hums a low, expensive note. There are no sirens, no shouting neighbors, no smell of stale cooking oil from the hallway, just the scent of fresh white tea and new construction. However, the transition has not been seamless. Yesterday, I met a woman in the elevator, a young thing with lips that looked painful and a dog that fit in her purse. She glanced at my grocery bag reusable canvas, stained at the bottom, and offered a pitying smile. "Deliveries go through the service elevator." "Sweetie," she said, not looking up from her phone. I felt a flash of heat in my chest, a mixture of shame and dark amusement. I pressed the button for the top floor. "I am going home," I said softly, "to the penthouse." She looked up then, her eyes widening. "Oh, I didn't realize." I stepped out without looking back. This is the new reality. I am an imposter in my own palace. I feel a swelling pride when I look at the deed in my safe, a validation of every skipped lunch and mended sock. But beneath the pride, there is a vibration of anxiety that I cannot shake. It sits in my chest, heavy and cold. I walked to the window and looked down at the grid of the city. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. David thinks I have moved into a senior living facility to save money. I have not corrected him. I tell myself I am just settling in and waiting for the right moment. But the truth is sharper. I am afraid. I am afraid because I know that in a world built on greed, silence is a luxury that costs more than money. And I have a sinking feeling that my quiet days are numbered. The view is beautiful. Yes. But it feels less like a home and more like a fortress before a siege. The doorbell rang exactly 72 hours after I had unpacked the last box. I had not given David my new address, which meant he had put more effort into finding me in the last 3 days than he had put into calling me in the last 3 years. When I opened the heavy oak door, my son stood there holding a bottle of wine that I recognized from the bottom shelf of the grocery store. His wife, Jessica, stood beside him, her eyes darting past my shoulder to devour the interior of the apartment. "Mom!" David exclaimed, his voice pitched an octave too high. My God, you're hard to track down? He hugged me, but it felt performative, like an actor hitting a mark on a stage. Jessica offered a tight smile, her gaze already fixed on the crystal chandelier hanging in the foyer. "We were so worried," Jessica said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "David has been sick with worry. We thought something happened to you." I closed the door, the latch clicking with a heavy, expensive sound. "I am fine," I said evenly. "Just settling in." They walked into the living room, and I saw the exact moment the scale of my purchase hit them. David stopped dead in the center of the room, staring out at the panoramic view of the city skyline. The late afternoon sun turned the space into a box of gold light. Jessica ran her hand along the back of my Italian leather sofa, her fingers lingering on the grain. David turned to me, a look of bewildered greed on his face. "Mum, this is incredible. I mean, I knew you were saving, but it is comfortable," I replied, moving to the kitchen island. "Do you want water?" "Water?" David laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Mum, we need to celebrate. Look, I know things have been tense. I know I haven't been around much." He walked over to me, placing his hands on the marble counter. His eyes were wide, pleading, but not for forgiveness. "We heard you bought a penthouse, so we'll move in and make peace. We can be a family again." The sentence hung in the air, audacious and absurd. "We'll move in and make peace," as if my solitude was an act of war, and their intrusion was a treaty. I looked at my son. I remembered the day 3 years ago when I had the flu and asked him to drop off some soup. He told me he was swamped with work. Later that day, I saw photos of him on social media playing golf. I remembered the birthdays he missed, the holidays where they stayed for 45 minutes before rushing off to Jessica's parents. "Move in," I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "It makes sense," Jessica chimed in, walking over to join us. She had already taken her shoes off. "This place is massive. 2,000 square feet, maybe more. You don't need all this space. Vivian, it's dangerous for a woman your age to be alone. What if you fall? What if you get sick?" "I have a concierge," I said, "and a panic button." "It's not the same," David insisted. "Mum, listen to me. We are struggling with our rent. The landlord raised it by 15%. If we move in here, we can take care of you. We can handle the maintenance, the cleaning. You won't have to lift a finger. I took a sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch. I have learned that silence makes liars uncomfortable. They rush to fill it with more lies. And, Jessica added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, imagine the dinners we could host. David's boss would actually respect him if he saw he lived in a place like this. I watched them. They were not seeing a mother. They were seeing a stepping stone. They were mentally measuring the walls for their art, planning where their furniture would go. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. This wasn't just a visit. It was an invasion. I enjoy the quiet, I said finally. Quiet is just another word for lonely, David said, his tone shifting to something sharper. Don't be stubborn. We are doing this for you. Jessica wandered toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Which one is the master? She asked, not really asking. The one on the left has the better view of the bridge. Right. That would be perfect for, well, for a workspace. I watched her walk away, and then I saw it. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter, face up. A notification popped up on the screen. It was not a text message. It was a calendar reminder. Lease termination deadline. Notify landlord by Friday. It was Wednesday. They hadn't come here because they heard I bought a penthouse and wanted to reconnect. They were here because they were being evicted or priced out, and they needed a lifeboat. They did not want to save me from loneliness. They wanted me to save them from reality. Jessica, I called out. She poked her head out of the hallway, looking annoyed at being interrupted. Yes. The master bedroom is locked, I lied. And the guest room is currently being used for storage. David frowned. Storage for what? For my things, I said. Since I plan to live here? Alone? The air in the room shifted. The fake warmth evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp tension. David looked at Jessica, and for a split second, the mask slipped. I saw panic in his eyes. Mum? David started, his voice trembling slightly. You can't be serious. You're going to let us keep renting that dump when you have 2 empty bedrooms? That's selfish. I thought you came to make peace, I said softly. We did. David snapped. But family helps family. That's how it works. I looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, knowing he was likely behind on the payments for that too. Yes, I said. I suppose that is how it works. I did not kick them out. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. I wanted to see exactly what they thought I was worth. Over the next week. Jessica did not just visit, she audited. She walked through my rooms with the critical eye of a health inspector, running her manicured fingers over surfaces to check for dust that did not exist. The penthouse was no longer my sanctuary. It was becoming their potential showroom. You know, Vivian, Jessica said one afternoon, holding up a ceramic bowl I had owned for 20 years. This clutter, it really cheapens the aesthetic. People who live in places like this don't have tchotchkes from the 90s. I took the bowl from her hands, perhaps a little too firmly. That bowl was a gift from my mother. Jessica laughed, a sound that lacked any genuine humour. Right. Back when gifts were all you could afford. It is funny, isn't it? You spent decades clipping coupons, and now you are sitting on a gold mine. But you still act like you are one paycheck away from the street. It is sad, actually. Her words dug deep, but not in the way she intended. I looked at her and saw the contempt she had always hidden behind birthday cards and obligatory holiday texts. I remembered a Christmas 4 years ago. I had asked David if he could help me pay for a dental crown because my insurance did not cover it. He had sighed, looked at his shoes, and told me that things were tight. That same week, Jessica posted photos of their new ski trip to Aspen. Now, surrounded by Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling glass, their tight finances seemed to have vanished, replaced by an aggressive entitlement to my resources. David was no better. His visits became frequent, but his conversation shifted from feigned concern to property management. He stopped asking how I was feeling and started asking about the building's bylaws and the homeowners association fees. "Mom," he said during dinner on Friday, cutting into a steak I had paid for. "I was thinking about the second bedroom. If we move in, we should probably soundproof that wall. You watch TV pretty loud, and I need quiet for my calls." I set my fork down. "I haven't agreed to anyone moving in." "David." He rolled his eyes, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my stomach turn. "Don't be difficult. It is logic, not emotion. You are an old woman alone in a fortress. We are young. We bring vitality. Plus, think of the equity. If you let the place rot with your old furniture, the value drops. We are trying to protect your investment. My investment." That was what I had become to them. I was no longer a mother. I was a holding company. The Penthouse was not a home in their eyes. It was leverage. It was a symbol of the power they felt they deserved, but had never earned. The pain of this realization was physically sharp, like a stone swallowed whole. I had spent my life thinking that if I just gave enough, if I just loved enough, they would respect me. But money had not bought me respect. It had only bought me clarity. It acted as a magnifying glass, exposing the cracks in our relationship that I had ignored for decades. "Vitality," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it? I call it reality," David replied, taking a sip of wine. "You need us." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the weakness in his jaw, the greed in his eyes that he mistook for ambition. I realized then that arguing was pointless. Confrontation would only make them defensive, and I needed them to be comfortable. I needed them to be arrogant. "Eat your steak, David," I said, my voice calm. "It is getting cold." I decided then to stop fighting. I would let them plan. I would let them measure the drapes and critique the rugs. I would let them believe they had already won, because the more comfortable they got, the more careless they would become. And I needed them to be careless. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went before I cut it out. The truce ended on a Tuesday afternoon, shattered not by a scream, but by the sound of strangers laughing in my living room. I had returned early from a walk in the park to find my front door unlocked. Inside, 3 people I had never met were standing on my Persian rug, holding glasses of my vintage Merlot. Jessica was playing tour guide, waving her hand toward the skyline with the proprietary air of a duchess showing off her estate. "And of course," Jessica was saying, her voice dripping with artificial sophistication, "we plan to renovate the kitchen next year. The current marble is a bit, well, dated. We want something more open concept." My blood ran cold. I stood in the entryway, clutching my keys until they dug into my palm. "Get out." The laughter died instantly. The 3 guests turned to look at me, their eyes wide. Jessica froze. Her glass halted halfway to her mouth. "Vivian?" she exclaimed. her smile faltering but not disappearing. You. I didn't expect you back until 5. These are just some friends from the club. I was just showing them the view. This is not a museum, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for decades. And it is certainly not your house. Get them out, now. The guests, sensing the hostility, mumbled awkward apologies and shuffled past me to the elevator. As the doors slid shut, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from embarrassed silence to volatile confrontation. David walked out of the master bedroom, my bedroom holding a tape measure. "What is going on?" he asked, looking at Jessica's flushed face and then at me. "Your mother is being hysterical," Jessica snapped, downing the rest of the wine. "She just kicked out the Thompsons. Do you know how humiliating that is?" "I don't care about your humiliation," I said, stepping further into the room. "I care about why you are measuring my bedroom." David sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable child. "Mom, we talked about this. The movers are coming on Saturday at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was just checking if our king-sized bed would fit in here. You will take the guest room. It is smaller, easier for you to keep warm." I stared at him. The audacity was so absolute it was almost impressive. I never agreed to this. In fact, I distinctly remember saying I enjoy the quiet. "Stop it," David yelled, slamming the tape measure onto the marble island. The crack echoed through the high ceilings. "Stop acting like this is just yours. We are family. You have 3,000 square feet of space, and you are one person. One. It is selfish. Mom, it is incredibly selfish to hoard all this while your own son is living in a cramped apartment." "It is my money," I said quietly. "I earned it. I saved it. And who gave you a reason to live all those years?" Jessica interjected, her voice shrill. "We gave you a purpose. You are just a lonely old woman with a checkbook. Without us, you are nothing but a ghost in a glass box. You should be thanking us for filling this empty space." The cruelty of her words took the air out of my lungs. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource allocation problem. "I want you to leave," I said, pointing to the door. "We are not leaving," David roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "We are moving in on Saturday. I have already cancelled our lease. We have nowhere else to go." In his anger, he paced frantically, pulling his phone out of his pocket as it buzzed violently. He looked at the screen, and for a second, the arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer terror. He hit the decline button with a trembling thumb, but he wasn't fast enough to silence the automated voice that blared out on speaker for a split second before he cut it off. "This is a final notice regarding the outstanding debt of $55,000. Immediate payment is Ray." Silence slammed back into the room. David looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. The secret was out. It wasn't just about high rent or a desire for a better lifestyle. $55,000, I repeated, the number heavy on my tongue. It is a business loan," David stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The investors, they pulled out last minute. Mom, you have to understand. They are going to seize the car. They are threatening to garnish my wages." I looked at my son, and then at his wife, who was suddenly studying the floor. The feeling of betrayal was no longer a dull ache. It was a sharp, clarifying light. They weren't moving in to take care of me. They were moving in to hide from their own disasters. I was not their mother. I was their bailout. "Get out," I said again, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Mum, please," David whispered, reaching out a hand. "Get out before I call security," I said. "And take your tape measure with you." As the door clicked shut behind them, I sank onto the sofa. The penthouse was quiet again, but the peace was gone. I sat there as the sun went down, realizing that the war had officially begun, and for the first time in my life, I knew I was fighting on the opposite side of my own child. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The city below was a grid of amber and white lights, indifferent to my insomnia. I sat in the leather armchair, the one Jessica had called outdated, holding a cup of cold tea. The silence in the penthouse was no longer luxurious. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of David's screaming, $55,000. The number kept rotating in my mind like a ticker tape. I thought back to the beginning, the double shifts at the firm, the years I wore shoes with holes in the soles so David could have the newest sneakers. I remembered the time he crashed his first car at 17. I paid for the repairs. I paid for the insurance hike. I told him, "It is okay. Everyone makes mistakes." I never let him bleed. I whispered to the empty room. I never let him feel the pavement. I realized then that my love had been a soft prison. I had shielded him from every sharp edge of reality, and in doing so, I had rendered him incapable of navigating the world without a guide. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought sacrifice was the highest form of love. But looking at the reflection of my tired face in the glass, I saw the truth. I had not raised a man. I had raised a parasite. And parasites do not love their hosts. They consume them. The difference between unconditional love and enabling is a line I blurred until it vanished. Unconditional love says, "I love you no matter what you do." Enabling says, "I will fix what you do so you never have to feel the pain of it." I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cold glass. The city looked vast and cruel, but it was honest. If you do not pay the electric bill, the lights go out. If you do not pay the rent, you are evicted. My son and his wife lived in a fantasy where I was the eternal safety net, the one who would always catch them before they hit the ground. No more, I said aloud, my voice startlingly loud in the quiet space. This penthouse was supposed to be my reward, my sanctuary. Instead, it had become the courtroom where I finally put my motherhood on trial. I looked at the dark hallway leading to the guest room, the room they wanted to turn into an office, the room they felt entitled to. I felt a shift inside me. It was not anger anymore. It was something colder, something harder. It was the resolve of a woman who realizes she is the only thing standing between herself and ruin. I needed to know everything. The $55,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. I was certain of it. David's panic had been too raw, too absolute for it to be just a single bad loan. And Jessica, her desperation to move in was not just about status. It was about survival. I walked to the safe in the closet. I spun the dial left to 10, right to 25, left to 7. The heavy door swung open. Inside lay my deed, my passport, and my husband's old ledger. I traced the spine of the book. "Help me be strong," I whispered, "because I am about to break his heart to save his soul." I closed the safe. The decision was made. Tomorrow, I would not be the mother who cooks soup and signs checks. Tomorrow, I would be the auditor. I would dig into the rot, no matter how much it smelled. I would find out exactly who my son had become, and then I would decide if he could be saved, or if I had to cut him loose to keep from drowning with him. The sun began to bleed grey light over the horizon. I did not sleep. I watched the dawn break, knowing it was the last morning I would wake up with any illusions left. The next morning, I did not make coffee. I made calls. I spent 30 years in compliance auditing at Stratford and Associates, a firm that specialized in finding money people did not want found. I retired 2 years ago, but my access code still worked on the public databases, and my favor bank was still full. I sat at my dining table, the morning sun glaring off the glass surface, and I began to dig. I started with the county clerk's records. I typed in David's name. The screen populated instantly, a cascade of red flags that made my stomach turn. It was not just one loan for $55,000. There were 3 liens against his car. There was a tax warrant from the state for $12,000. And there was a second mortgage on their current apartment that was currently in default. "Oh, David," I whispered, my hand covering my mouth. "What have you done?" But the math did not add up. David was a mid-level manager. He made a decent salary. He was not a gambler, at least not historically. Where was the money going? I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. Stratford and Associates. Risk Management. A gruff voice answered. "Marcus," I said. "It is Vivian." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. Vivian Clark. The only woman who could find a missing penny in a $1 billion budget. To what do I owe the pleasure? "I need a comprehensive asset and liability search," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "Honor Jessica Clark, maiden name Miller." "Personal matter?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting to professional caution. "Strictly," I said. "And Marcus, I need it within the hour." 45 minutes later, my email pinged. I opened the file Marcus had sent, and the narrative of my son's life fell apart. The debt was not David's doing. Not originally. The report showed a series of failed business ventures registered under Jessica's name, an online boutique that never shipped inventory, a consulting firm with no clients, and the most damning piece of evidence, a high-interest private loan for $200,000 taken out 6 months ago, co-signed by David. They were not drowning because of the economy. They were drowning because Jessica was addicted to the appearance of success, and David was too weak to tell her no. I read the notes Marcus had attached. Subject appears to be leveraging existing credit to pay off previous interest. It is a Ponzi scheme of one. I sat back in my chair. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They did not want to move into the penthouse to take care of me. They did not even want to move in to save rent. They needed my address. They needed my equity. If they established residency here, if they got their names on a utility bill or, God forbid, the deed, they could use this property as collateral to refinance their disaster. They were going to leverage my retirement to pay for her mistakes. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away immediately. There was no room for grief now. Grief is for things that are lost. This was not lost. This was stolen. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "Hey, Mum? We're still on for Saturday." Right, Jessica is really excited to decorate. I stared at the message. A normal mother would call him screaming. A normal mother would demand answers. But I was not just a mother anymore. I was the auditor. And an auditor does not reveal her findings until the final meeting. I typed back slowly. "Come over for dinner tonight instead. just the two of you. I have made a decision about the move. I set the phone down. I printed the documents, the liens, the tax warrants, the loan agreements with Jessica's signature scrawled in loops that looked like barbed wire. I placed them in a neat stack inside a manila folder. I placed the folder in the center of the marble island. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The fear I had felt days ago was gone. The anxiety was gone. In their place was a cold, sharp clarity. "You want a lifestyle you cannot afford," I said to the empty room. "Fine. I will show you exactly what it costs." I went to the kitchen and began to prepare dinner. I chopped vegetables with precise, rhythmic strokes. I was calm. It was the calm of a soldier checking their ammunition before the enemy walks into the ambush. They thought they were coming to a victory dinner. They had no idea they were walking into an arraignment. David and Jessica arrived promptly at 7 o'clock. They brought a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of lilies, the kind wrapped in crinkly plastic from a gas station. They were smiling, but their eyes were tight at the corners. They looked like gamblers walking into a casino, convinced their luck was about to turn. "Mom," David said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "The place looks even better at night. The view is... wow." "It is, isn't it?" I replied, stepping back to let them in. "Come, sit. Dinner is ready?" We sat at the long marble dining table. I had set 3 places, positioned so that I sat at the head with the city lights framing me from behind. I poured the wine. I watched them exchange a glance, a quick, nervous signal that meant stick to the script. "We are so glad you invited us over," Jessica started, unfolding her napkin with exaggerated elegance. "David and I were talking, and we really feel bad about the other day. We just want what is best for you. Vivian." We got a little passionate. "Passion is a powerful thing," I said, slicing into my roast chicken. "Sometimes it blinds us to reality." David laughed, a hollow sound. "Right, exactly. But we are past that. We want to help you manage this place. It is a big responsibility." I took a slow sip of my wine. "Management requires stability. David, how is your job going?" "You mentioned a promotion last month." David choked slightly on his water. He cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "Oh, it is going great. The promotion is... well, it is in the pipeline. These things take time. Corporate bureaucracy. You know." "I do know," I said evenly. "I spent 30 years in corporate. Usually, promotions come with raises. Is that how you are planning to pay off the car?" David froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. "The car? The car is fine. Why would you ask that?" "Curiosity," I said. "I noticed you parked it down the street instead of in the guest lot, almost as if you were worried a tow truck might spot it." "That is ridiculous," Jessica snapped, her voice sharp. "We parked there because the guest lot was full. Why are you interrogating him?" "I am just making conversation," I replied, turning my gaze to her. "Speaking of work, Jessica, how is your consulting firm? The one you registered 6 months ago? Miller Strategies. Was it..." The colour drained from Jessica's face. She set her wine glass down hard, the stem clinking against the marble. I am still building the client base. It takes capital to start a business." "Vivian, you wouldn't understand. You worked a salary job your whole life. You don't have the vision for entrepreneurship." "Vision." I repeated the word, tasting it. Is that what you call a $200,000 private loan with a 25% interest rate? The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to roar in the quiet. David looked at his wife, his mouth slightly open, genuine confusion warring with panic. "Mum?" "What are you talking about?" David asked, his voice trembling. "I am talking about the numbers." "David," I said, leaning forward. "You said you wanted to move in to help me. But people who help usually have their own houses in order. You told me last week you were debt-free. You told me the rent increase was the only issue." "It is," David insisted, though his eyes darted to Jessica. We are having a liquidity issue. That is all." "Liquidity," I said. "That is a fancy word for being broke." Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. "Stop it. Stop acting like you are some high and mighty judge. So we have some debt." "So what? Everyone has debt. You are sitting on a $3 million asset, all alone, while your family struggles. It is disgusting." "Sit down, Jessica," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not move. I just looked at her with the cold, dead stare of an auditor who has found the embezzlement. "No," she shouted, her hands shaking. "You don't get to judge us. We are the ones with a future. You are just waiting to die in a golden cage. If you were a real mother, you would sign this place over to us so we can actually build something. We could leverage this equity. We could be rich." "And there it is," I said softly. "Jessica," David whispered, looking terrified. "Shut up." "No, let her speak," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "She is finally telling the truth. You don't want a home. You want collateral." "We are your family," Jessica screamed, her face twisted and ugly. "You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I said. "But since we are putting everything on the table," I reached under the placemat and pulled out the manila folder. I placed it in the center of the table. It looked innocuous, just a simple beige folder, but to them, it might as well have been a loaded gun. "What is that?" David asked, his voice barely audible. "That," I said, "is the end of your lies." I flipped the manila folder open with a single finger. The sound of the stiff paper hitting the marble was the only noise in the room. "Page 1, I said, my voice devoid of inflection. "A default notice on the Lexus, dated 3 weeks ago. Page 2. A credit card statement for an account in David's name, maxed out at $40,000. Most of the charges are for high-end fashion and hotel stays, not business expenses. Page 3. The loan document for Miller Strategies, $200,000. I looked up. David was staring at the papers, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. He reached out a trembling hand and pulled the credit card statement closer. 40,000, David stammered, his eyes darting to Jessica. "Jessica, you said you paid this off with the bonus. You said the account was clear." Jessica did not look at him. She was staring at me, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. She knew the game was over. But she was not the type to surrender. She was the type to burn the board. "You went through our private records," Jessica hissed. "That is illegal. That is invasion of privacy. It is due diligence." I replied calmly, "And considering you were trying to defraud me, I think the law will be on my side. You didn't want to move in here to take care of me. You wanted to establish tenancy. In this state, if you stay for 30 days, You gain tenant rights. You wanted to squat in my home so your creditors couldn't touch you. You wanted to use my address to refinance your bad loans. David made a sound like a wounded animal. He looked from the papers to his wife, the realization crashing down on him. You were going to use Mom Jessica. Tell me that isn't true. Oh, grow up. David. Jessica screamed, slamming her hand on the table. We are drowning. Your mother is sitting on a $3 million penthouse and she drives a 10-year-old car. She is a hoarder. She hoards money while we suffer. I did what I had to do to save us. You lied to me, David whispered, tears spilling over his lashes. You told me the business was booming. You told me we were buying this lifestyle, because we earned it. He turned to me, sliding out of his chair and effectively falling to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. A grown man reduced to a child by his own willful ignorance. Mum, please, David begged, clutching the edge of the table. I didn't know about the loan. I swear. You have to help us. If we don't pay the interest by Friday, they will seize everything. Just a bridge loan. I will pay you back. Please. Don't let us lose everything. I looked at my son. I saw the fear, but I also saw the expectation. Even now, on his knees. He expected me to write the check. He expected the ATM to dispense cash because he had entered the correct PIN, his tears. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. What? David blinked, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. I said no, I repeated. I am not your bank, David, and I am certainly not your insurance policy against your wife's greed. Jessica laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You selfish old witch. You are going to let your own son go bankrupt. You are going to let us end up on the street. You won't end up on the street, I said, meeting her gaze. You have parents in Ohio. You can go there. But you will not stay here. You will not step foot in this penthouse again. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that David flinched. I walked to the window, looking out at the skyline that I had bought with decades of discipline. I spent my life making myself small, so you could be big. David, I said, my back to them. I denied myself everything, so you would never want for anything. And this is the result. You became a man who thinks he is entitled to the sweat of my brow. You think my safety is your inheritance. I turned back to face them. The room felt cold, the air conditioning humming a low, indifferent note. The ride is over, I declared. You are 32 years old. Figure it out. Mum. David sobbed, reaching a hand toward me. Please. I can't fix this alone. Then you will fail, I said coldly, and perhaps failing is the only way you will finally learn how to stand. Get out. Take your champagne. Take your lies. And do not call me until you can show me a bank statement with a positive balance that you earned yourself. I pointed to the door. Go. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was thick, suffocating. Then, Jessica grabbed her purse, shot me one last look of pure hatred, and marched out. David lingered for a second, looking at me with devastation in his eyes, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the mother who forgave everything to reappear. She did not. He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The door clicked shut, and the lock engaged with a final, decisive snap. I was alone again. The silence returned, but this time, it did not feel lonely. It felt like justice. The fallout was swift and absolute. 2 weeks after the dinner, David and Jessica vacated their luxury apartment. They did not move into my guest room. They moved into a basement unit in a suburb nearly 45 minutes away, a place where the rent was 1/3 of what they were used to paying. I did not help them with the deposit. I did not hire the movers. For the first time in his life, David had to feel the weight of his own boxes. The silence in the penthouse was profound. In the beginning, it felt sharp, like the sudden drop in pressure before a storm. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence changed. It stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like peace. However, the world outside my windows was not as quiet. Jessica, true to her nature, did not go quietly. She launched a campaign of whispers. My phone began to ring with calls from distant relatives and old acquaintances, people who had not spoken to me in a decade, but suddenly felt entitled to an opinion on my parenting. My sister-in-law, Karen, called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reading on the balcony. "Vivian," Karen said, her voice tight with self-righteous indignation. I just got off the phone with Jessica. She is hysterical. She said you threatened to call the police on them, Vivian. That is your son. She lied, I said, turning a page of my book. I did not threaten the police. I threatened reality. There is a difference. They are living in a basement. Vivian Karen cried out. Jessica said there is mold in the bathroom. David is selling his watch. How can you sit in that? That ivory tower of yours and let them suffer. Family is supposed to support each other. I looked at the city skyline, at the steel and glass glittering in the sun. Family is not a suicide pact. Karen, I supported them for 30 years. Now, I am supporting myself. You are going to die alone. Karen spat out, her pretense of concern evaporating. And no one will come to your funeral. Then I suppose I will save money on the catering. I replied, and hung up. I blocked her number. Then I blocked Jessica's. Then, with a shaking finger, I silenced notifications from David. It was a strange sensation, this voluntary isolation. For years, I had feared loneliness more than anything. I had let them bleed me dry because I thought the price of admission to their lives was my financial compliance. I thought if I stopped paying, I would cease to exist to them. And I was right. I had ceased to exist as a resource, and therefore, I had ceased to exist as a person to them. But the crushing grief I expected did not come. Instead, there was a sense of lightness. The anxiety that had lived in my chest for years, the fear of the next phone call, the next crisis, the next request for money was gone. I began to reclaim the space. The penthouse was no longer a potential showroom for Jessica's vanity or a collateral asset for David's debts. It was my home. I hired a decorator to paint the guest room a deep, soothing blue, a colour Jessica would have hated. I bought a piano, something I had wanted since I was 20 years old, but never justified buying because David needed braces, or tuition, or a car. One evening, I sat at the piano, picking out a clumsy melody. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the marble floor. I was alone. There was no laughter, no family dinner, no noise, just me and the music. I realized then that happiness was not something grand and loud. It was not a crowded table where everyone secretly resented each other. Happiness was safety. Happiness was knowing that when I woke up tomorrow, the roof over my head was mine, paid for and protected. I had forced my son into the wilderness. Yes. It was a cruel thing to do, but as I looked at my reflection in the window, older, tired, but standing straighter than I had in years, I knew it was the only act of love I had left to give. I had finally stopped crippling him with my help. The loneliness was there. Certainly. It sat in the corners of the room like a quiet guest. But for the first time, it was a guest I had chosen, not one that had been forced upon me. And in that choice, I found a dignity I had not felt in a very long time. It was 6 months before I saw my son again. We met at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the Spire. I chose the location. It was public, neutral, and expensive enough to ensure the tables were far apart. When David walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. His suit, usually tailored and crisp, looked slightly too big for him, hanging off his shoulders like a coat on a wire hanger. He looked tired, not the fatigue of a late night out, but the deep, marrow-level exhaustion of a man who is actually working for a living. He sat down across from me, not daring to order a drink. "Mum," he said, his voice rough. "You look good." "I am good," I replied. I did not return the compliment. It would have been a lie. "I wanted to see you," David started, his hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. "I wanted to tell you that, well, Jessica and I are separated. She went back to Ohio. I couldn't keep up with the payments she wanted. And once the money was gone, she was gone too." I nodded. It was not a surprise. I had predicted that outcome the moment I closed the safe that night. "I am sorry to hear that," I said, though my voice remained steady. "Are you?" David asked, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Because you were right. About everything. I was drowning. Mom, I was drowning, and I kept pulling you down to keep myself afloat. I didn't want to see it." He waited for me to reach across the table. He waited for me to tell him it was okay. To pull out my checkbook and offer to fix the wreckage of his marriage and his credit score. In the past, I would have done exactly that. I would have bought his redemption. Instead, I took a sip of my black coffee. "I am glad you finally see it," I said. David flinched. "Is that it, Mom? I am alone. I am living in a studio apartment. I am driving a used car. I am paying for my own mistakes." "Good," I said. "That is how you become a man." "David, can we ever go back?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I don't mean the money. I mean us. Can I still be your son?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the child I had raised, but I also saw the stranger who had tried to rob me. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It is a road you build, brick by heavy brick. "I am your mother, David," I said firmly. "I will always love you." But the dynamic we had, the one where I give and you take, that is dead. It died the night you brought a tape measure into my bedroom. "I know," he whispered. "Here is the condition." I continued, leaning forward. "If you want to be in my life, you come as you are. You do not come with debts. You do not come with schemes. You do not come asking for a loan. The bank of Mom is closed, permanently. If you can accept that, then you can call me on Sundays. If you cannot, then do not call at all." David stared at me for a long time. I saw the struggle in his face, the instinctive desire to beg for a shortcut. But then, he took a breath. He straightened his shoulders. "I can accept that," he said. Then I will see you on Sunday, I said. I stood up. I did not pay for his coffee. I did not offer him a ride. I walked out of the shop and down the busy street, the wind catching the lapels of my coat. I walked with a rhythm I had not possessed in years, the stride of a woman who owes nothing to anyone. When I returned to the penthouse, I went straight to the balcony. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of violet and gold. I looked down at the streets, at the thousands of people rushing, fighting, striving. I was no longer down there in the fray. I was up here, in the silence I had bought and the peace I had defended. I used to think revenge was about making people pay. I thought it was about screaming, or lawsuits, or public humiliation. But standing there, breathing the cool, high-altitude air, I realized the truth. Revenge is not about what you do to them. It is about what you do for yourself. My son was learning to walk on his own 2 feet. My daughter-in-law was a memory, and I was free. I had taken back my name, my money, and my dignity. The greatest revenge against those who try to use you is not to destroy them. It is simply to live well, to live loudly, and to refuse to let anyone else hold the pen that writes the story of your life. Thank you so much for tuning in to this story. I really hope you enjoyed it. I would love to know where you folks are listening from today. Drop a comment down below and let's get a conversation started. I read every single one of them. If you want more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this video reach more people. See you in the next one.